Good evening, everyone. How are you doing this evening? So happy to have you here back with us. My name is Lorraine Edwards. I'm the co founder of A Single Mission, a business ministry that exists to help single women embrace their singleness, walk in their purpose, and prepare for the partner they desire. But I'm not just someone who helps you do that, I'm also single, never married. And that's what I'm doing with my life. And that's part of the reason that we are here helping you live, love, and marry wisely. Today, I want you to check in with us. What do you know about generational trauma, if anything? We are happy to have you here. And on this episode, we have the other single one back with us. Renee is here. Everyone say hi to Renee.
Hi, everyone.
Cool. Happy to have you back with us. So, I want to start by saying that we're going to be talking about generational trauma. And I want to just basically give an alert. We might mention some things. We're not going to go really deep. This is going to be just kind of a overview of this topic and some of the impact it can have on us as single women and how we are in our relationships. But I do want you to be alerted that we might talk about something that could trigger you or something that can cause you some anxiety. So we want to make sure that you are aware of that before we get started. In addition, we would like to say we are not therapists. I do have an MSW, but I'm not a therapist. And so we are not going to be doing therapy and we're not going to be going deep in that. What we would recommend is that if something is triggered or there's something that you learn here, you'd say, hey, I think I might need to see a therapist, that there are many options. One we would talk about is betterhelp.com. You can make that's an online service for therapy, and you can kind of pick the type of therapist that you want. You can also just Google your local therapist, and there are a whole line of them will come up, and you can make your choice. Or you can ask someone that you either is a therapist, but you may not want to see them, ask them for a referral, or a friend who has been in therapy that maybe they can refer you to someone. So we want to make sure that you are protecting yourself, your heart, your emotions as we talk about some things that may trigger you. I am a proponent of therapy. So even if not for this, but maybe for some other things, um, seek help. So we're going to get started. And the first thing we want to basically talk about is what is generational trauma. And so if you can follow me on that, of course, there are many different definitions, but the basic definition is trauma experienced in one generation that has an impact on the health and well-being of future generations. And the reason that we've been talking about this is because Renee brought this topic to me as something of interest. So Renee, I'm going to let you just kind of talk a little bit about what interested you about this.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching a YouTube video on, well, actually, it was a random sermon. The sermon did not have a title. I had no idea where this particular pastor was going. And it just so happened that he was talking about generational trauma, which honestly I've never heard before, and the effects thereof. And one thing that really caught my attention was him describing how, you have to please forgive me. What caught my attention was him talking about a book that basically said when we are experiencing the effects of trauma in our own lives or in the lives of others, he specifically said he had read a book that says it doesn't start with you. And I was like, huh, excuse me, what did you say there?
Mhm.
And so I kind of zoomed in to hear a little bit more. And he was talking about, things that we already know. There are certain ways that we have, certain responses that we have to certain things in life. And we question those things. Why do I do this? Why do they do this? And he was saying that some of these things are some of the responses of traumas that have been passed down
Mhm.
generation to generation. So, and then he went into more detail about what some of those responses were. And honestly, I will say that I related to some of those. And so nonetheless, he completely had my ear on that. And I thought that that was a really good topic to bring to you, because again, when we talk about who we are and how we are, that is the basis of all relationships, right? So to me,
Right.
I think that's a perfect topic for live, love, and marry wiser.
Oh, I love that. Um, so one of the things that we want to talk about is how does that manifest? What is that? So basically, what it's looking like, something happens to, let's say, my grandmother or my grandfather, something traumatic, and trauma is really just, let me define that too, actually, is just an acute emotional response to an event. um, and so something happens that's traumatizing to my grandmother. Her either, and they studied this a lot with the Holocaust, the descendants of people who were in the Holocaust, that her response to that can actually be be passed down to me. Her fear, her anxiety, her guilt, her shame, those types of things can be passed down. How she responds is more of a behavioral response, like hypervigilance or mistrust or irritability, or maybe sexual promiscuity, or sexual like restrictiveness, like very closed and with affection and those types of things. And that can be passed down to her daughter or her son. And then that passed down to the grandchildren. And a lot of that is because of what you experience in your environment. You're owning that as that is what's true. Like that's what we do. What we learn, we're like, oh, well, that's how life is. So I need to be fearful, or I need to mistrust. I need to be hyper vigilant over these types of things because that's what I experienced. And so that trauma is then transferred to mother and son and daughter, grandchildren, and even great grandchildren, because no one breaks the cycle, which we're going to talk about at the end.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
With what you just shared, I literally have never seen it the way that I experienced it from what you've seen, that the way that I just saw it as you were talking. So
Okay.
you're talking about, a Holocaust survivor telling the story of the horror and trauma of that time, right? And then you were saying, just what I am understanding is that you're saying that the effects will present themselves could in a number of different ways. Like
Mm-hmm.
you were saying, being agitated and irritable, like really having an unpleasant disposition, in sexual promiscuity, or like being extremely having that high anxiety, or being extremely reserved, like I just don't want to be around people, period. That to me speaks to how wide, broad, and fast, and how, and the varying ways that that stuff can spread. And what I'm really saying is, the family is interacting with this person, and they might pick up that anxiety, or they might pick up the sexual promiscuity. But And as that goes down the generational line, these things are coming down and they don't know that where it originates.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah. Okay. Okay. Please continue.
No,
I mean,
that's go
it's
ahead. Go
one
ahead.
trauma, and then the people around are dealing with like 5 different things from that one thing.
Right.
And it just keeps going and expanding as it travels down that line.
Exactly. Because it's not like this person just has one child and then that person just has one child. Suppose this person, this trauma happens to them and then they have 4 children.
Yeah.
And one child might be anxious, another child might be promiscuous, the other child might be self-sabotaging, like, and it's, people also have resilience. We pass that down too.
Yeah.
But it's still, it becomes part of who we are because we don't understand that. And now I have, each of us have two or three children. So now that's another generation of 12 or 15 more people who are feeling the impact of what has just happened.
Yeah.
And another thing is that, especially like I want to share, actually, we talked about the Holocaust, but I want to share some of the types of trauma that we're talking about. There's obviously a wide variety from things that might seem minuscule to things that are just horrific. So bullying, physical, sexual, emotional, verbal abuse, poverty. That's a really big one. I kind of want to go back to that. Racism, huge, huge. Community violence. So even if it's not in your home, if you're surrounded by it, that is traumatizing. And sometimes that's like a nightly or bi-daily event when there's community violence. And so there's constant, trauma to you. But it could be something like a parent who doesn't ever come to your camera went out. A parent that doesn't ever come to your games, and you don't really understand why. Or it could be a parent who, chooses someone else over you for a certain chore or activity, and you have a sense of now worthlessness. Like, even my parent doesn't think I'm good enough. And so you carry that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years until maybe you like start to, or you hear something like this, or you get a breakthrough. And now all of your relationships are founded on your belief that you're not worthy. You're not good enough. And a whole host of things can come from that when you think about being, particularly for women, but for men too, being in a relationship when you don't think you're good enough. Then who you pick is usually not who you pick, but who picks you, because you don't think you're good enough. And so, and that means that if they picked you, then you're going to maybe stay longer than you should, or whatever. And the same for men too. They might be taking advantage. Like, there's a woman who might just like dominate and manipulate and all of these things, because they're feeling like, well, no one else is going to love me and they are, so this must be okay. But then think about how that impacts you in that moment. And now what if y'all have children, and now we pass that on? So it's just like what is that? A domino effect, right? We're not talking about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like a domino effect. And also just talking about that woman in that example though, is, yeah, they have a tendency to possibly to stay longer, to just outright settle, to overperform, to And then, yeah, like you said, those are different things that they are passing along, and it affects their speech and the way that they talk. So everybody, who is hearing has um, they're going to have to decide, like, what exactly am I hearing and what am I going to do with what I'm hearing? If you talk to your, sound minded friends, and then you talk to your child, or someone else in the community who is not as strong minded, they could very much kind of pick up on you know whatever it is that you've got going on, for the lack of better words, so please forgive me on that. But yeah, as far as that domino effect, I think you pretty much spoke on this already when you spoke about the Holocaust, when you gave the Holocaust example. In this particular sermon, again, this pastor was talking about different things that we deal with in the now. And he referenced a book called It Doesn't Begin With You, or It Doesn't Start With You. Yeah, unfortunately, I did not get the opportunity to study the book, but nonetheless, in from my understanding of what he was saying, it was that he was saying, like, the devil is busy, right? We live in a sinful world, and we always want to blame everything on the devil, the devil, the devil. And he was saying that, the devil does it. The devil is smart, right? And he's been busy for a very long time. And so you don't necessarily have to be his ultimate focus. You know what I mean? Like, he wants to destroy you, but he doesn't have to focus on you. What he did already was focused on your great, great, great way back in the line. And what he did was he tipped that domino way back there. And it's been tipping, 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 tipping. And now you are still feeling the effects. And I really love that, because it doesn't necessarily take the accountability off of us. Matter of fact, it puts it on us once we recognize what in the world is going on. You know what I mean? Because the accountability is to recognize it for what it is. And we want to be that last domino that really disappoints. That domino that says, because, like, when you, as a kid, when you set that thing up, you want all of them to fall. Right. And if that last one doesn't fall, you're not happy.
Yeah.
We want to be that last domino that upsets the devil. Sorry, we're not. It's not going beyond us.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
So the accountability does fall. Well, yeah, it falls on us to recognize this thing for what it is, to put in the work to do that. I think I mentioned, like, that root cause analysis. Let's go back a step. Why do I believe this is happening? And then why did that happen? And just keep asking that old childhood question of why, until we get to the root. And then we can pluck that thing up and move forward, stand strong, and stop those dominoes from affecting all the others ahead.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to just share these two books that we were talking about. We will reference probably. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin, and we can probably get that in the comments. And the other one is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel A. Vanderkolk.
German name. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I really, especially that last one, The Body Keeps the Score. I had heard about it a couple of years ago from another pastor who was talking about the earthquakes in New Zealand. But this one is actually really interesting. Like, it's almost a narrative. He tells a lot of stories that kind of make the point about just trauma in general. He's not specifically talking about generational trauma, but we got to talk about the first trauma in order to kind of get to that. And I want to talk about poverty and racism. Initially, generational trauma was studied around the Holocaust survivors and their family and their descendants. But now a lot more is being focused on racism and how that impacts us generationally, so that, and we can see that it's so interesting. I was watching a different YouTube um, program, and I had made a comment. They were talking about I think about teaching. It was a long time ago, teaching about Black history in schools, and it was a Christian program. And there were people who commented that this leftist liberal stuff, that we don't need to be talking about this or whatever. And um, and I commented very kindly, but I did comment on that. I don't always comment on stuff like that, but I did. And someone else commented to me. They said, well, what do you think the bigger issue is? Is it people, having, babies out of marriage? And they listed this whole long thing, like babies out of marriage, being disrespectful to other Black people, or, looking at education as being white, or racism. And I just answered this today because I just saw it today. And I just thought it was funny because it fit. Because I said, the problem is that you think those things are different.
Mm.
Those are some of the generational curses or traumas that result from racism and slavery. And so when we separate that and think, oh, well, no, these are just behaviors that are just because of poor, child rearing, or just maybe inferiority of the people, as opposed to the impact that racism has. Racism is not just, I don't like you because you're Black, or you're brown, or you're, Asian, or whatever. Like, what happened to Black people in this country was as much, if not more, of a Holocaust than the Holocaust.
Right.
We call that and we acknowledge it, but we need to recognize that when you steal men from their families, and you separate families, and you make men the studs for, this, and so that you can create more slaves, and all of those things, and just a host of other things, that generational trauma is passing down. And now men are, and then let's get to the 60s, when families couldn't get government aid if the man was in the household.
Right.
Okay. So now you're still pulling men from the family. And now you're saying, well, what about, people having children? Well, that's what you told us to do. Now, obviously, everyone doesn't do that, but that's what you train a generation, until someone breaks the cycle and says, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do this differently, or we're going to have a marriage, or whatever. So to separate those issues. And I think that's the problem, even with when we talk about, let's talk about sexual abuse. And then that turns into maybe promiscuity, especially when you're talking from a Christian church perspective.
It turns into a few things, but
Yeah,
promiscuity could possibly turn into homosexuality. It could turn into it could turn into that going completely inward, it could go into obesity. It could go into any number of things, just by people's ways and methods of trying to protect themselves from re-experiencing those traumas.
But that's my point. Like, no one says that. I mean, no, you're not going to look at someone who goes inside themselves and be like, oh, that's a sin, and condemn them. You're going to be like, oh, that's a good Christian person. She's not, or he's not. Versus if someone, then their brain says, oh, this is what I'm worth, this is what I'm good for, and then they do that. Now, instead of addressing the person, we address the behavior, particularly in faith communities. Now the behavior is what we look at. And that's the same problem with the guy with the comment. And so I think that and I'm gonna let you talk after this, but the significance of the generational trauma is that we stop just assessing people based on their behavior, and we look and say, why this behavior?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why this behavior? Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, just the word why, it just says that children, babies, they're onto something.
Mm-hmm.
Because they want a full understanding of what is going on. But the other thing that I was thinking while you were talking too is that, in the beginning, when you and I were talking, we were, trying to say, or trying to determine the difference between the generational trauma, the generational curse. I don't know how to differentiate the two. But what just came to me right now is that generational curse that is passed down from generation to generation, it doesn't matter what the trauma is. I believe that generational curse is a corrupted mindset, a corrupted way of thinking, whether you are the oppressed or the oppressor.
Yes.
Yes, just straight across the board. And that, again, it takes us back to this mental health, taking that time to get your mind right, to get your agreements right with this world, in so many things. Like when it comes to our sexuality, when it comes to our sexual identity, when it comes to our overall identity, when it comes to the people around us, when it comes to guarding and directing the avenues of our mind, right? And the things that we hear, that we see, the things that we do, we have to be careful and mindful at all times, because I think that that's like the core of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of these traumas are affecting our minds, and our behaviors flow, from that. Right. So one of the things that I had written down in my millions of pages of notes was that there are so many, and I didn't want to get hung up on these words, traumas and triggers and all that stuff, but there are so many different events that can take place that have the potential to destroy us. Right. And some of it is through our direct interactions with people, right? We're talking about families, friends, we're talking about your siblings, community members, schools. You said this already, right? Your teachers, just any and every person that we encounter. But then there's also indirectly, right? We're talking about music, television, the fact that art imitates life. And yes, there is traumatizing art, pictures, images, things that we see, the gossip, the things that we listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I bring those up because I will say, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. It was my son. He was saying that for a time, like, he didn't trust women. And I was like, honey, why would you say that? And he says, because that's what he sees on television. When he said that as a young child, as a parent, I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is what he is seeing. He's internalizing it. He's processing it. And to a degree, it is becoming a reality in his mind. Right. So it's my responsibility as a parent now to have this conversation and to distinguish television from the realities. Like, a part of that is a reality, but there's another side. The other side, and having that balance, is what I believe kind of allows us to maintain that hope, and to not have us so downtrodden and having us giving up on things without, finish that for me, because I'm hitting a brick wall.
Giving up on things without making a proper, like, judgment and assessment. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Roberta and Trina. Thank you for your comments earlier.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it prevents us from having this negative worldview, right off the bat, and just canceling things right at jump. Like, oh no, I'll never try a relationship because I don't trust women. Or, my auntie had a bad experience with a man, and he lived with her and robbed her blind. I will never have, you know what I mean? Though that is a reality, but it's not the whole picture.
It's not the whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you hit on something really important about mindset, which is
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the thing. You know, I had said a few weeks ago that I had the great controversy going on in my head.
Mm.
But the reality is, yes, there's a great controversy out there. As believers, we believe, obviously, that the enemy, Satan, is battling good and God and all of that, that will come to an end. But throughout the Bible, we see that the enemy wants our mind, God wants our mind.
Right.
Why? Because the mind is the center of
Mm-hmm.
control.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know how we love, who we love, what we do, where we go, those things. And when we are admonished in the Bible to guard the avenues of our soul, it's really guard your mind. There are just different ways that the mind can be accessed. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we are not as diligent about that, then there are consequences. For some of us, those consequences may be minimal or undiscernible, but for many of us, they are not.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, when we are in real life witnessing trauma or the impact of trauma, then that is playing a part. And it's not just impacting our mindset. It's literally impacting our brain.
Our brain. Right. Right.
That is what the science is telling us, that when I'm pregnant, which that won't be happening, but when I'm pregnant, whatever I do while I'm pregnant doesn't just impact the baby I'm carrying, it impacts the baby that she will carry if it's a girl. And so we it's like you can't get away. There's no generation that is not impacted, because once my daughter has a child, then her grandchild's already impacted. And so it's just a continuous impacting. And so that impact can be for good. You can fill your mind with things, you can read positive things, you can have positive interactions and relationships, you can be healthy, you can eat healthy, you can do all of those things to counteract what is a sinful world. Or because you're anxious or stressed or bothered or whatever came from your mother or your father, all of that. This is not just through women, but we know that is just biological that you're carrying, but that it impacts how you are going forward in your life and your relationships and your grandchild and your great grandchild. And in this book, it starts with you. It didn't start with you. He tells this story about this guy named Jesse. He was 19 years old, and he woke up one morning and he was like shivering and felt afraid that he was going to die. And so then he would not go to sleep because he kept being afraid that he was going to die. This didn't happen before he turned 19. Like he had never experienced this before. And so for a long time, I think for several weeks or even months, he couldn't sleep because he was afraid that he wouldn't wake up. Well, when he went to this therapist who wrote the book, they were working through this, and he asked him, like, is there anything in your family history that might have triggered? Or it turns out not his father, not his mother, but his uncle died at 19 because he was working in a snowstorm, and like the power had gone out, and he was like, I think one of the people who works on the poles or whatever, he fell and he froze to death. He wasn't there. I'm not even sure if he knew the story, but this is how powerful this thing is to me. When he was telling those stories in the book, I was just like, that is incredible. When the Bible says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, it's true. It's so amazing. Of course, when sin came into the world, that wonder also sin impacted how that wonder was manifested. But I'm just like, that's incredible. So when they, identified what that fear or why that fear had come at 19, his uncle was 19 at when that happened. He was able to kind of work through that, and then he was fine. And there were so many more stories like that. Sometimes they did know about it, but they had internalized those things. And so it's amazing what we pass down from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Renee, how do you think this impacts how we as single women, single people, live, love, and marry? Like, what could be the impact for good and for bad? I mean, obviously trauma is not good, but like, what can we do to counteract some of those things?
I would say recognition.
Okay.
Recognition, taking the time to study, get to know yourself, to understand yourself and, the individual of interest. Because as you're getting to know each other, you're going to learn some good and some not so good. And if we try to get that understanding, we may not be so quick to write people off, or we may be faster to say, you know what, this may not work, because we are taking serious note of what's going on, and like I said, just trying to understand what in the world is going on with them. I think that, in the world that we're living in now, especially with, and I'm going to say it this way, with prophecy being fulfilled, with us seeing how fast the world is changing, people are changing, the laws, the freedoms, and all these different things are changing, the war, the calamity. There's just so much going on, right? And with so much going on, that means so many people are affected.
Right.
I'm single, you're single. We might meet somebody affected. I might be affected. We have to understand. We have to take the time to weigh all of that as we're going forward in that process.
Yeah.
Of trying to determine who is or is not right for us.
Yeah, I love that you said, I particularly love that you said not just evaluating yourself, but also the other person. That's really critical when, everyone has gone through some trauma in their life. Some have been more significant. Some people have different levels of resilience. Some people go through trauma, but they're in a healthy, happy, loving family. And so they're able to navigate and heal from that differently than people who don't. And so, but we have to be asking those questions, and we have to be looking at behaviors and moods. I want to just quickly go through some of these. There's 3 ways that some of these there's other ways too, but we're just going to review our mood: guilt, shame, anxiety, fear, oppression, loneliness. Those are mood, the ways they manifest through our mood. The way they manifest through our behavior is hypervigilance, social withdrawal, self-sabotage. How many people have seen that? Like, you are actually on the path to something good, and then you're just like, you run away because it just feels like something's going to mess up before. So let me just sabotage it now. Psychologically, people have flashbacks or they have intrusive thoughts. We talk a lot in our retreat about self-love and how, and, a lot of that is about what you think about yourself, respecting yourself, loving yourself, not, stealing joy from yourself. So these are intrusive thoughts that are continuously saying, you're not good enough, you don't deserve, you're not honorable. And then emotional disconnection. Like, certainly if you aren't able to emotionally connect with another person, but you want to be married, that's going to be problematic. And so all of these things can impact how you interact and how you connect with the partner that you desire. Because intellectually you're saying, and emotionally you're saying, I want to be married. I want a healthy, happy marriage. Nobody says I want an abusive, disastrous, toxic relationship. Nobody says that. Everybody wants to live, love, and marry in a healthy way. But when we have these other things that are driving us, it's easy to detour from what our ideal actually is, and also let other people come into our life who are not what they should be. And I'm going to say this last thing. I just did a course about flags and the roadmap and all that stuff. And the thing, we were talking about our deal breakers and must haves. And for me, a must have is someone that has a growth mindset. And it's like, what is that? That's just, trendy or whatever. No, it's someone who's just like, I can look at myself and be like, I need to grow in that area. I don't feel offended or like humiliated because I'm not good in something. I can be like, oh, I can get better in that. If you have a growth mindset and you have these traumas, or you can say, I'm going to go to a therapist, I'm going to get a coach, I'm going to go to a support group, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to watch a YouTube Live, Love, and Mary Weiser program at 6:15 on Tuesday. I'm going to do whatever I can do to learn how to deal with these things. I'm not just going to be like, well, that's me, and you just accept me how I am. And if you can't deal with it, then that's just you, and blah, 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 blah. And so for me, there's almost nothing that you can't manage with a partner if you both don't come to the table with, yeah, I've got some brokenness, but I'm ready to fix it. As soon as I know what it is, let's work on it. Let's work on it together. Do you have any final thoughts? And then I'm going to just wrap up.
That we should do a part 2, because there's so many things that we didn't even touch today. There's so many things. But I actually just wanted to repeat the same exact thing that you said. As far as you guys getting to know each other, yeah, you want to get to know, you want to see those behaviors. You also want to know that they have the mechanisms to deal with and understand their own stuff, and the capacity to understand you, and for you guys to see how you're able to work together and make this union work. Because trauma is not, something that necessarily has to be thrown out. It's something that has to be worked on. Because if we all cast each other aside because of trauma, we would all be single for the rest of our lives.
Right, exactly.
Right. But yeah, it's just figuring out how to get on that path and work together towards that wholeness of relationship. Not perfectness, but that wholeness.
Right. I love that. And I think that means that your camera went out. But I think that means that was such a hot comment that your camera was like, couldn't take it. But I think that what's so awesome about what you said is that when you need to make sure, obviously, and we've talked about flags on a little bit before, we'll talk about it again. You need to make sure that you have the same value system. You need to make sure that there are some specific things that are aligned, but you're never going to know. Even when you're married, you're never going to know everything there is to know about somebody. So even as we talk about the flags to look for, yeah, we want to be aware of some things. Some things are, deal breakers, but there are other things that are like, okay, yeah, we can work through that if you're working through that. But we have the same values that we want to be healed, that we first of all know that God is going to be our center. But then we also, I'm like, we're going to get help from outside. We're going to talk to a counselor. We're going to talk to a therapist. Oh, we're running out of time. And so we want to just encourage you to look at yourself, to look at those things, to go through some. If you heard something that you were just kind of like, oh yeah, that is me, don't deny it. Don't reject that. That is so not a great place to be. And we're going to go a couple minutes over because I got to share the scriptures with you. So, Heather, you can put the scripture up. Exodus chapter 20. Visiting 5 and 6. I want you to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you the snippet. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands who love me. And a lot of times people think that this means that God is punishing the children for their father's sins. And that is not what that means. And I'm going to show you it's not what it means because I have another scripture, but we're not going to go there right now. But God is caring for, but he's also saying, think about it. If your father is wicked and he hates God, what is likely going to be your the next step for you? Like, you're going to grow up in a home that is wicked and hate God. You're probably going to be wicked and hate God too. Now, obviously, there can always be intervention. That's what we're here to be doing as witnesses for Christ. But I believe that passing down is that there's wickedness that passes down because there is no breaking of the cycle. But God says, I have mercy for thousands. So whenever you break the cycle, whenever you come to me, yeah, there's mercy for you. So let's go to the next scripture. Ezekiel 18:20. You should read all of Ezekiel 18. It's great. But it says, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. And previously in that scripture, it talks about if you have a wicked father, but then you don't do the deeds that your father did, you're not going to pay the price that your father paid. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to break the cycle today, right now. Like, whatever is going on with you, stop being dumb. Just stop ignoring that. Stop ignoring it because that's how my family was, or I don't know how to change. BetterHelp.com, Google counselors. Even if you have to start with your pastor, if you have a pastor that you trust, and at least talk about it. And then referrals can be made to other resources. But get help, because you don't have to live in the trauma that your family passed down to you. Maybe they didn't know that, but now you know. So go and do differently. Until next time, make choices that will help you live, love, and marry wiser. God bless.